Hello, this is Alicia Deva. I'm the author of Before War on Marriage, Hierarchy, and Our Matriarchal Origins. I've been doing a series of conversations and dialogues with really good and interesting men on the topic of the battle of the sexes, the harmony of the sexes, the future harmony of the sexes is the goal. The issues that society is going through and transitioning from an old model of masculinity and femininity to the future model, perhaps. All of these conversations. And I'm extremely excited to be here with Coach Michael Taylor, who's written a bunch of amazing books and is a coach that has changed men's lives by redefining what it means for them to be men, and has changed his own life. And I'll let him say more about himself and his work.
So let's go back a little bit. So at the age of 23, I was living the American dream. I had the house, the wife, the 2.5 kids, the vacations, and all of that. And by society standards, I was pretty successful. And within about a 6.5 year time frame, that American dream turned into the American nightmare. As I went through divorce, bankruptcy, foreclosure, a deep, deep state of depression, or even contemplated taking my own life. I was actually homeless for 2 years, living out of my car. And
Wow.
during those dark, dark periods, I asked myself a question. And that question was, what does it mean to be a man? Because I had done everything I thought a man was supposed to do to be happy, and I was absolutely miserable. And I
Wow.
couldn't figure out why. And so as a result of that, I began what I'll call my journey of transformation, which began with my willingness to go to therapy to start looking at some issues. And I just became obsessed with personal growth and development. And so after rebuilding my life, I decided I wanted to share the lessons that I'd learned along the way with other men. And this was actually it started in 1995.
Wow.
And that was back then when you didn't have many men talking about manhood and masculinity. Matter of fact, that's one of the reasons I started writing books, because I went to a bookstore and I was asking questions about, divorce and raising your children after divorce and all of that. And I just didn't have many resources for men. And so again, I said, you know what, I'm going to write some books. And so again, I had absolutely no experience writing books, but I knew I had some information that could support and empower other men. And so I began writing again back in 1995, and I've been speaking and writing about the changing roles of manhood and masculinity ever since then.
Awesome. It was probably around that time that I first became interested in men's movements, because I read Iron John, and that was kind of like what started it all. And I was reading David Data, and that was really big back then, because it was kind of a response to, there was kind of another wave of feminism in the 90s, around the goddess movement and the sort of psychedelic movement and everything. And I remember thinking, you know what, women's movement can only go so far until men join us, really, because like otherwise it's kind of like nagging, right? Like it's like, come on, we have to do this together. But then I was disturbed to see, as time went on, that some of the men's movements weren't necessarily pro women. So like this idea that there's this kind of a zero-sum game, like either women can do okay or men could do okay. But like the reason why I'm so excited to talk to you is that I think we're both on the same page, that it's not a zero-sum game. We can empower each other and empower ourselves without taking something away from each other.
Yeah. And again, I think, first of all, let me say this. I am an irrepressible optimist. That's just the lens through which I see the world. And have you ever heard of Barbara Marx Hubbard?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I'm a huge fan of Barbara Marx Hubbard. And she wrote a book called Conscious Evolution, one of my favorite books. And in the book, she talks about how human beings are still evolving. And she says we're evolving from what we know as Homo sapiens to what she called Homo universalis. Okay, so that's kind of her theory. And I firmly believe that. I firmly believe human beings are still evolving, and we're actually in the process of waking up. And
Mm-hmm.
so when I think about things like the feminist movement and the men's movement, again, it's all part of this consciousness that's waking up, because in my belief system, there is a divine intelligence that created everything. And
Mm-hmm.
this intelligence knows exactly what it's doing. And so it set all of this in motion. And it's
Mm-hmm.
our responsibility to figure out how to get in alignment with it as it evolves. And so one of the reasons why I want to jump on this call with you, first of all, I love what you're doing, having this conversation with men. But again, I think it's all about raising the consciousness of the planet.
Yeah.
And so when we can engage in these types of conversations, I believe we start laying the foundations to creating solutions to all the challenges we have in the world versus the division and hatred and anger that you see all the time.
Exactly. The 13th chapter of my book is all about conclusions and solutions. So the other chapters it's all about the origins of what some people call the dominator paradigm, what some people call patriarchy. The word patriarchy has been, once a word has been kind of like too overused, it tends to like lose its gain too much of certain types of contexts that aren't healthy and lose its original meaning. And it became maybe misused by women calling themselves feminists who are really just angry and unfortunately, using it as a club or a weapon. Maybe that's happened. But unfortunately, like we never, so the word has been kind of demonized, but we never really got to have a real conversation about what it means. And I believe that you have done the best job of anyone I've seen of articulating with your work the actual, like a breakdown, a really accessible breakdown of how patriarchy affects men. And so I define patriarchy as an institution, a set of beliefs that put some people in a hierarchy over others. So traditionally it's been men over women, and white people over other people, and upper classes over lower classes. So hierarchy culture. But we still live in a culture where women take men's names, which is pretty weird if you think about it. Patriarchy comes down to going from father to son as your lineage. So previously, the lineage went from mother to daughter, in terms of how you knew who your ancestors were, and that's made a lot of sense because you always know who your mother is. And once it started transitioning to patrilineal inheritance through the father, that's when we started to see a lot of sexual repression, because in order to know who your father is, you have to control at least women's sexuality. And that's what's led to a lot of this sort of violence and war and psychopathology. So I say at the beginning of my book, it's not about blaming men. Blame, first of all, is not very useful, and shaming is definitely counterproductive. So men have been just as affected by this as women have been, and women have perpetuated it as much as men have, sometimes even more, because women have had to be even more brainwashed into this set of belief systems in order to go against their self-interests, basically, to be submissive. So it's not about men did this to women, it's about just a system that we're all captive to. And so you've done this great job to outline the 5 ways that patriarchy kind of conditions men into this belief system. Do you want to talk about those kind of a summary of those 5? What do you call
Yeah,
them?
so let me give you Michael Taylor's viewpoint on this, because I believe it's all about paradigms. And so this is how I define a paradigm. A paradigm is simply a rigid way of believing, thinking, and behaving. That to
Exactly.
me is a paradigm. So if you look at masculinity as a whole, we've had these rigid ways of viewing manhood and masculinity for a very long time, right? And currently, the old paradigm of masculinity, in my opinion, is no longer sustainable. Why? Because women said, wait a minute, no, we're not going to just stay home barefoot and pregnant. We want to get jobs, and we want to do all these wonderful things. And they're doing that, right? And so a lot of people don't realize that in America, for the first time, more women in the workforce than men, more women are graduating from college than men. So they started this shift simply by saying, we want equal rights, right? So the paradigm shifted. First, women were saying, okay, I don't have to stay home. I don't have to just be pregnant. I can have careers. I can do all that. So that was a shift in believing, thinking, and behaving. For men, the problem is we are so trapped in this masculine paradigm, we don't even know we're trapped in it. And that's why you have men that are kind of getting all bent out of shape when women start talking about equal rights. Because men are like, no, 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 no. Women, you're supposed to do this. You're supposed to do that. So as men, you know, we're fighting this. But again, the optimist in me says, number one, the feminist movement was a great thing for this country. And it wasn't an attempt to say men were the bad guys. Women just wanted equality. Great. So now men are saying, well, wait a minute. Maybe we need to rethink this thing. So again, back in 1995, when I started writing, there were very few men having this conversation about manhood and masculinity. And you mentioned Iron John, which was one of those paradigm shifting books that really got men to start thinking a little differently. And then there were things like the Mankind Project. Are you familiar with the Mankind Project?
Yes, I've read about it for years, and then I learned a lot more about it in one of your books, and I'm really excited. It sounds wonderful.
Yeah, and the Mankind Project was the result of men coming together saying, okay, so wait, if the women are going to change, and maybe we need to change. And so the Mankind Project launched this movement, and in this movement, it's a 3-day weekend. It's called the New Warrior Training Adventure, and it gives men an opportunity to really re-examine what it means to be a man. And it's kind of baffling how simple this really is. That as men, the challenge that we have is to get comfortable simply embracing new roles of manhood and masculinity. For example, if a man says, you know what, I'm going to be a stay-at-home dad, okay? 10 years ago, 20 years ago, oh my gosh, he was attacked, vilified, you're lazy, so all these labels we try to put on men. But then men said, you know what? I'm okay with that because my wife makes 3 times as much money as I do, so I'll stay home. Well, see, we've been conditioned to believe that women were the nurturers, but the truth is men can be just as nurturing as women. Sure. And that kind of freaks people out a little bit because culturally, we thought that the women were the nurturers, which leads me into what I call the 5 illusions of manhood. And once again, when you start looking at these 5 illusions, it's really about paradigm shifting, changing the way we believe, think, and act, right? So I came up with this, this has been almost 10 years now when I wrote A New Conversation with Men. It was actually my second book. And as I was doing the research and again, just kind of trying to figure out my own life, I realized that every man relates to these 5 illusions. It's amazing. And so the first illusion, which I think is the most destructive, is to be a man, we must be non-emotional and disconnected. And herein lies the problem for men. We were conditioned to believe that feelings were for women. Men don't have feelings. If we did, there were only 2, right? Anger and rage.
Anger, rage. That was a dirty trick to play on men.
Yeah, and so what happens is, as men, what we do at a very early age, we start suppressing and repressing and denying how we feel because we don't want to. We don't want to be accused of being a weak, sissy, punk, whatever you want to call it, and we don't want to express how we feel. So at a very early age, we hear things like "big boys don't cry," "don't be a punk," "don't be a sissy." So the conditioning starts real early that men aren't supposed to feel. And the only feelings that are okay, pretty much anger, right? And sometimes happiness. But, men don't want to talk about sadness. Don't want to talk about fear. But they're just, emotions are just energy in motion. And so for men, we have to be willing to understand that women don't have the monopoly on feelings. We men feel at the same depth and level as women. It's just we've been conditioned not to.
Yeah.
Women have always had permission to
Mm-hmm.
express how they feel. Men haven't. But once again, that's changing.
Mm-hmm.
More and more men are going, whoa, wait a minute. I'm going to rethink this masculine thing because I feel deeply and I need a space to talk about it. I heard a guy not too long ago was talking about feelings on TV. And this other guy accused him. I think he said, what was the word he said, you guys are promoting the pussification of men. And I thought it was funny, but it really wasn't because the guy was talking about feelings. And so the other guy, like most men, can't relate to the emotional part that he was trying to share. And so that's what men do. They put up these defense mechanisms, say, oh, no, I'm tough. You're trying to pussify men by telling us to get in touch with our feelings, that woo-woo stuff. But the truth is, as men, we all long for the same thing. We just don't know it. And what we long for is connection. And unfortunately, if you're trapped in that first illusion, you can't connect because you can't be relational if you're unwilling to be emotional.
Our emotions are what cause us to connect.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You cannot have connection without emotions. It's a feeling. It's how we connect. And so men are really struggling with that. But at the same time, again, the optimist in me says men are starting to wake up. So that's illusion number one. Is to be a man, you must be non-emotional and disconnected. Illusion number two, to be a man, you must use sexual conquest as a gauge for manhood. From a very early age, as young boys, probably around 12 or so, everything starts to move. Hormones start moving. We get erections and we don't know what to do with. And so there's a natural part of being human that says, okay, as a male, this is what's going to happen. Well, we live in a culture, in a society that promotes this idea that in order to be a man, you must sleep with as many women as possible. That's how you validate your masculinity. And so you got a lot of these guys walking around trying to get notches on their belts by sleeping with as many women as possible. And of course, if you look at our culture, our sex sells culture, we're constantly bombarded and inundated with images of sex and scantily clad women and boobs popping out all over the place. And it's like, okay, so wait a minute, guys. We need to change this conversation because having sex with a woman does not make you a man. And unfortunately, what happens is, especially if a man is trapped in illusion number one, where he's not in touch with his feelings. Well, if he's not in touch with his feelings and then he's trying to go out and have sex, then it becomes addiction.
Right.
Because they're trying to feel something that's missing inside of themselves. And they think by sleeping with someone, that kind of validates them. The problem is, even when they do that, if a man will be completely honest with himself, there's a lot of shame and guilt in that. They may not recognize it, but a lot of men, they may conquer sexually, but deep down, emptiness. Deep emptiness. So that's illusion number two. To be a man, you must use sexual conquest as a gauge for manhood. Illusion number three is to be a man, you must have money and material possessions. Now, once again, absolutely nothing wrong with making money and lots of it. That's not what I'm saying here. Unfortunately, too many times, men's entire identities are wrapped up in their stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. So think about it. And there was a thing recently, I don't know if you saw this. This girl, some guy was going to take her on a date. He was going to take her to the Cheesecake Factory or something. And she said, no, I wouldn't date a guy that takes me to the Cheesecake Factory. Did you see that story? Yeah, it was a big thing. And women were all talking about, I wouldn't date a man that would take me to Cheesecake Factory or whatever. We live in a culture that men think that, okay, so in order to impress women, I got to have stuff, right? So get my car, get my clothes, get my watch, get all my stuff to try to attract women, right?
And
So,
women buy into that too.
oh,
You know,
absolutely.
you know,
Absolutely.
like the story you just told, it was the woman who was shaming him for the Cheesecake Factory because we're all inculcated into the same paradigm, which is patriarchy, which basically means that the man has to be the provider. He has to create the stuff while the woman is the sort of cleaner, domestic servant, emotional manager, and sex object. So those are the roles that have been given us by this paradigm. Whereas before 5,000 years ago, when this began, and that's what my book goes about, is how this began and how this arose and all the evidence for that from academia. Before, everyone were providing for everyone. And it was the uncle, the mother's brother, was the man in the children's lives. So the maternal uncle played the role of father, and that way there was no need for all this sexual conquest and all of this um, obsession with paternity and needing to know who the father was, which is what creates the sexual shame for women. So just as it's the conquest for men, the flip side for women is the sexual shame. And now there's all this talk about body count again is coming back around, because a woman is supposed to only have her allotted man in order to know who the father is. And so we play into these roles, whereas before everyone would provide. Like, you can't find a hunter-gatherer society where a man brings back, a piece of meat and gives it to his kids. Like, no, that meat is for everybody. So this whole idea of man the provider is really just a paradigm, and is not something that goes back. I mean, we go back in history hundreds of thousands of years, and patriarchy is only 5 to 7,000 years. So we in order to understand where all this comes from and how it all fits together in this framework.
Yeah, but you got to understand though, since caveman days, since the caveman days, men have been conditioned to believe, or men accepted, that they had three responsibilities. The three P's: procreate, provide, and protect.
See, I would argue with that in the
Okay.
sense that's kind of what my book is about, is that previous to this whole change in society, which started with the Indo-Europeans, there wasn't this concept of man the provider or the protector, because there's really nothing to be protected from. And women hunted as well, and women were in charge of the resources for the whole clan. So this whole idea of protecting and providing really only goes back a few thousand years. So it's
And
not
I'm
really
curious. I'm
yeah,
curious. So with your background in history, I'm
prehistory,
say
prehistory,
again?
prehistory.
Prehistory. Okay, so imagine the caveman. Okay, in the caveman days. So you're saying that the women hunted as much as the men?
Not as much, but they also did hunt.
Okay, so but who would be the primary provider?
Everybody in the clan provided.
From the standpoint of just bringing food into the cave.
Yeah. So they, most of the food calories came from gathering, right? Berries and, and children did that too. So everybody did what they did. And, women hunted too. They're only figuring out now that women hunted, now that they have the technology to identify the sex of a skeleton, which is pretty new in the last 10 or 15 years. So there all these hunter burials are realizing, oh, that's actually a female skeleton. So it's a little harder for women to hunt if they are breastfeeding. But what our assumption is that women were always too hampered with breastfeeding and child rearing. But the thing is that women had their kin, their brothers and their sisters and their mothers. The grandmother played a huge role in taking care of the children. So child rearing was communal, and so was hunting and gathering and providing.
But do you think because of men physically being stronger, which was part of the evolutionary process, I think, that
Yes,
men
for sure.
had this role, that they, as the provider that was, going out there fighting the saber-tooth tigers or whatever they were fighting. So it's like we as men, I think, had that role very, very early on, that we're supposed to procreate, provide, protect. The problem is that's what men are still focusing on today. And
I
so
mean, I
what
think
I'm
it's a pretty recent idea.
the,
But yeah,
the,
and it doesn't really like apply to our lives now, like you're saying. Like it doesn't really, it's not really useful in today's society, right? Because there are no saber-toothed tigers.
correct. But unfortunately, too many men today still think that that is their primary responsibility.
Right.
That's still a lot of men and are struggling with this idea that, okay, so my job is to provide and protect. So what am I supposed to do? I'm supposed to work 80, 90, 100 hours a week so I can provide for my family. And at the same time, I still got to be tough. I got to, make sure nobody's going to mess with my family. So I got to fight. So that's still a huge part of masculine culture, right?
Right.
So, but point being taken here, illusion number 2. We talked about the sex. No, we're talking about the money.
Right.
Money. Talking about the money. So when you talk about money, men, generally speaking, if you think about it, how many times have you gone on a date and the guy took you out to this really nice, fancy place on your very first date? Speaking to you specifically.
You're asking? You're really asking?
Yes, I'm asking you.
Honest, like I don't really do that paradigm. Like it's generally kind of like we decide to go out and then we split the bill. That's kind of.
Oh, okay. All right. So and that's, in my opinion, that's the way it should be. But the overwhelming majority, I guarantee you, of men are going to say, okay, I'm going to pay for the first date. Right?
And maybe that's fair because they generally make more money. I think whoever makes more money should pay more.
Got it. But this illusion that as a man, I have to have money to be a man. See, this is the point that I'm trying to make. If you don't have money and you feel like you're less of a man because maybe you don't make as much money as others, see, that's the mentality that some men get trapped in.
Yeah.
I don't make enough money to ask somebody out, or so we've got all this shame around money.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm trying to get men to understand that no, the money isn't what's going to make you a man. My favorite joke is, well, not joke, but what happened was my wife and I, on our very first date, I took her to Pizza Hut. And my wife happened to have a lot of very affluent friends, and they told her, "Why are you settling? Why are you going with this guy, works in a hardware store, and he takes you to Pizza Hut?" And they were just upset with her for going out with me. Because once again, they want somebody that provided and blah, 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 blah. Anyway, and so my wife, she just laughs because she said, I've dated a lot of guys, doctors, wealthy men. She said, but I'll take my husband and pizza any day. And my point here is that, number one, I had enough confidence in myself to take her to Pizza Hut. And it wasn't about trying to see if, she was going to be materialistic. I just happen to love pizza.
Oh, that wasn't a test.
Exactly.
You weren't testing her.
Exactly. It was not a test. It was not a test. Let's go and have pizza. So anyway, but that's illusion number 3. In order to be a man, you must have money, position, possession. Illusion number 4 is, to be a man, you must have titles, positions, and power. Now, we live in a culture that has this idea that a man with a PhD is somehow a better man than a man with a GED. No, he just may be well educated, but doesn't necessarily make him a better man. Once again, there are still some men who feel inadequate because maybe they don't have titles and labels. And so I get men to get to a place where they have enough self-love that they're not worried about the labels. They're not worried about the titles. And then when you can learn to love yourself, then it's not an issue. But that's really hard for men. And last but not least, illusion number 5 is, to be a man, you must constantly compete with and try to outdo other men. Now, we've all heard the term keeping up with the Joneses, right? Well, what's that about? That's about men competing against each other, trying to outdo one another, to try to one up each other. And so my conversation is about, okay, let's move away from competition, move into cooperation. Let's support each other. Hey, you got make a lot of money, fantastic. That's great. But I don't have to try to compete against you. I can just be who I am, and you can be who you are, and let's not compete against each other. So those are the 5 illusions of manhood that I really challenge men to ask themselves some deeper questions. And it's amazing how, like in my workshops, when I bring that up, then men are like, "Oh man, I never thought about it that way." But we get conditioned because of society, and we don't even realize. I do this
I like
really
to say
cool.
it's like water to a fish.
Exactly. Don't even know you're in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the metaphors I use is the roller coaster.
Mm-hmm.
As men, we get trapped on this societal roller coaster, and we're going round and round, up and down, but we're really not going anywhere. But because everybody else is on the roller coaster, we want to be on the roller coaster too. And it takes a lot of courage to jump off the roller coaster. It takes a lot of courage as men to say, you know what? Yeah, I don't want to do that. You know what? I want to be a stay-at-home dad. Yeah.
Mm.
Or, you know what? I want to create intimacy and vulnerability in my relationship. Yeah, I think I can. And men are like, whoa, hold on.
Are you still receiving a lot of pushback from men who are blaming you for being
Not
too
nearly
focused?
as much. And like I said, this is the reason for my optimism. Because more and more men are going, I relate to that.
That's
When
great.
I first started, man, I got a lot of pushback. Back in the 90s, oh my God, especially as a man who happens to be black too. That was a whole different conversation. But having this conversation about manhood and masculinity has nothing to do with ethnicity. It's about manhood and masculinity. And so we, as men, we're no different than each other. We're the same. But we have to be willing to challenge some of the old paradigms that I'm talking about and shifts to some new paradigms.
Well, I think it's just heroic work, and I mean, because you've seen it in your own life, and then in other men that and it was really great in your book how you included all these testimonials from men and how it changed them, and it's just like such a paradigm shift because at the same time I have one video I made about how paradigm shifts come in pendulum shifts. So we'll be evolving, there'll be all this progress, and then it's like the change is happening too fast, and people are like, "Whoa, too much change. Let's swing back to something familiar," right? And so we're seeing that now with the modern manosphere, and a lot of sort of the male coaching movement is going into doubling down on those 5 illusions of manhood, and really like reclaiming them from what they're sort. It's like those men who instead of saying, okay, I'm gonna break off the roller coaster, they're saying like, no, I'm gonna like drive the roller coaster faster because it's familiar, and they feel challenged by feminism, and it feels like it's taken something from them, and so that they're sort of doubling down on that, and so we're seeing a lot of this coaching movement, and it's been really interesting because it's from both the left and the right. The right wingers are saying, oh well, God says that men are supposed to be dominate, and women are supposed to be submissive, and then the left wing, it's coming from like the tantra movement, coming really out of David Data, like evolving out of what David Data was saying of men are supposed to lead and have a container, and going back to the men are supposed to get lots of women, and women are supposed to have a small body count, and men are supposed to make lots of money. So we see the Andrew Tates who are pushing this, this lifestyle of get your Lamborghini and get your bitches. And ironically, his money is all coming from like pimping out his girlfriends on OnlyFans, which it's like, really? Is that's your masculinity, is like being a parasite on these women? So it's all going into this weird direction, and then the women are jumping on that bandwagon too, and it's turning into kind of a cult where the women are like, oh, you need to go, this whole trad wife thing, You need to go back into the home and leave society to men. And but these trad wives are like making video content. It's like, are you really a trad wife? How much are you making with those product placements? Like so it's all very interesting to watch.
Yeah, but they, and there's still that, that pickup culture out there, that, these
Right.
young men coaches that are coaching young men how to just pick up women.
Right.
I mean, so it's there's a sad part for me when I see men who are doing things like that, that are just, basically trying to give men these tips on, okay, if you do this, then you get to sleep with women. But that can only take you so far. If you're committed to creating great relationships, it's not just about the physical act of sex. You got to have a lot more than that. But again, once again, my optimism is fueled by, last month, June was Mental Health Month. And we're putting a lot of emphasis on mental health. And we're removing that stigma of going to therapy, seeking support. So again, I believe the walls are coming down. I believe, again, men are definitely more open, but there's still a lot of work to do. For example, this whole idea of toxic masculinity. We got to talk about toxic masculinity. So from my belief system, in my opinion, there's no such thing, because what happens is we confuse a toxic behavior with toxic masculinity. So we see a story of rape, or we see a story of domestic violence, and the media says this is an example of toxic masculinity. No, that's not toxic masculinity. That's a toxic behavior. I will assert that the only reason that man is exhibiting a toxic behavior is because he's disconnected from his authentic masculinity. Because a man who's connected to his authentic masculinity would never exhibit toxic behaviors. So when we teach men to how to understand, first of all, how to understand how you feel, to be able to express whatever that is, you would never engage in that type of behavior. And this is the work, this is men's work, right? And it's still in some ways new that men are going, okay, so wait, let me take responsibility for my actions. Maybe I need
Mm.
to really look at what's driving my behavior. Well, that's what men's coaching is about. It's about giving men the tools of awareness to help them take responsibility for how they're acting. But again, the media takes this whole idea of toxic masculinity and it assumes that men are inherently toxic. And I completely disagree with it. I believe that all men have the capacity to be loving, nurturing, sensitive, all those cool things that we don't talk about as men. But once again, if you look at mainstream media, especially the news, look how men are portrayed. We're portrayed as, look at corporate corruption, domestic violence, infidelity. I mean, we're bombarded with that on a regular basis. The truth is, the overwhelming majority of men are actually good men. That's my assertion. The overwhelming majority of men are good men, but too many of them are still trapped in that antiquated paradigm of masculinity that I'm talking about, and that's why these types of conversations are so important.
Exactly. I totally agree with you that most men are good men. And my perspective would be that, I mean, masculinity in and of itself is just a neutral being a man, and that toxic masculinity, the way you used it in your earlier books, toxic masculinity is referring to that. I call it patriarchal masculinity, which is basically the five illusions of manhood that these patriarchal societies brainwash men into. And there's also toxic femininity, which is the ways that patriarchy brainwashes women into, which for women basically looks like the movie Mean Girls, if you've ever seen that. It's like a classic movie from the 80s or something. And now there's kind of a new version of it that Tina Fey just did, but it's basically being bitchy to each other and competing, because women patriarchy has conditioned women to compete with each other, because when we act together, we can, we can create cooperation. because in egalitarian societies before patriarchy, it was all about cooperation. That was because humans can go either way. We can cooperate or we can compete, and whatever is most rewarded by society will predominate. So in societies where kids are, encouraged to share, then they're going to see more cooperation, and where bullies are encouraged, we'll see more competition. So I would say that the qualifier toxic before masculinity indicates that is that patriarchal aspect that is brainwashed. It's not the core nature of men, just as toxic femininity is not the core nature of women. It is the way that we are brainwashed to behave. And all of that comes down to the elites of society. The rulers of society are benefiting from keeping us all competing, keeping us all divided, and constant wars. And that's why it's a trauma response. From my research, I found that patriarchy arose as a result of an extreme trauma of desertification. The Sahara Desert basically turned to desert very quickly. And so now we're just repeating those traumas over and over. So through healing, and what's so great about your work is you're breaking it down in a way that's it's easier to see. So it's not like water to a fish. So the first thing is to we see the patterns and we understand why we've been taught that. We understand why our trauma and our division benefits the people who are profiting off it. And then we can start to heal.
Yeah, and here's the way I view masculinity and femininity. This is Michael Taylor's perception of it all. Masculinity is the energy of doing. When I'm feeling ambitious and driven, there's this inner drive. That to me is masculine energy. Men have masculine energy, women have masculine energy. Femininity is the energy of being. It is the feeling nature. It is the trusting the inner guidance within. So basically, it's almost like the head and the heart. So femininity, men have feminine energy, and you say that to me, and they go, "No, I don't have no feminine energy." But again, it's just the energy of beingness. It's us being connected to who and what we are. And so when you just look at it from that simple perspective, it's like two sides of the same coin. We all have masculine energy. We all have feminine energy, male or female. So it's not gender specific. It's just energies that move through us.
I think if we got all 8 billion people together in a room, everybody would have a different definition of masculinity and femininity that we all couldn't agree on. I mean, I associate masculinity with athletic prowess. Okay. Men are strong, are able to do amazing things, like athletically have this vital power and strength. And I associate femininity with grace. There's a certain flowing grace, which I don't personally have, but maybe I've been accused of being too masculine. I don't know. I think we can all find a balance within ourselves that is most useful for the situation.
Sure. But men can be graceful.
It's true. Men can definitely be graceful.
Men can be graceful.
That's because we both have both.
Exactly.
And women can be, have strength and prowess too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. What I wanted to bring up something also real quickly. I talk about the 5 masks of masculinity.
Okay.
Did you see that?
I read that. Yep, I read that.
Because again, here's what I believe, because collectively, women have been having these spaces of healing and inner work for a long time. Men have not. This is technically kind of new for men to start talking about this inner work, right? This men's work. And so men are always it's easy because men can be very visual. And so rather than just get them in the heart, just kind of paint a picture for them that they can see and they can wrap their minds around and make it a little easier. So these 5 masks of masculinity helps men recognize, okay, so maybe I'm wearing those masks. So the question becomes, if you're watching this and you're a man, you go, well, what do you mean a mask? Well, a mask is really a defense mechanism we create based on something that hurt us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a trauma response. I think you used that term. It's how we protect ourselves. Not right or wrong, good or bad. It's just something that our ego creates to protect us. So if you experience some type of trauma, and it doesn't have to be some sexual abuse or something, your dad could say, "I'm really disappointed in you." That could be a trauma. So then we start
Neglect.
creating. I'm sorry.
Neglect is a big trauma that people don't often think about.
Yeah. So that's kind of why we start wearing masks, guys. If you're watching this, so here's the first mask, the Mr. Nice Guy mask.
Mm.
And I wore that mask for years. I hid behind this people pleasing, approval seeking mask, and I was codependent, didn't know how I felt. I was always worried about other people's feelings instead of my own. That's the mask of Mr. Nice Guy. Everything's always great. I'm always smiling, everything always happy.
Like bypassing, like kind of like spiritual bypassing.
Yeah. So that's a mask, guys. Sometimes we wear it. So if you relate to that Mr. Nice Guy mask, raise your hand. Okay, I got you. That's number one. Another mask that we wear is Mr. Tough as Nails. And that's the guy that doesn't show emotion. He's just tough, rigid, hard, disciplinarian. That guy is just don't even talk about feeling. Right, Mr. Tough as Nails. Okay. Another mask that we wear sometimes is what I call Mr. Gigolo, and that's the guy that hides behind sexual conquest. That's how he validates himself, by sleeping with as many women as possible and bragging about it to everybody. Right. And then there's Mr. Moneybags, and that's the guy that hides behind his stuff. That's the guy that's always got to have the nicest watch, the nicest clothes, the nicest car, and he hides behind his stuff, Mr. Moneybags. And last but not least, Mr. Stuck in his head. That's the guy that try to process everything from the neck up. He is completely disconnected from his emotion. What comes to mind are engineers. Engineers are really good at this because they're taught to think. They're taught to fix stuff, right? Well, that doesn't work in relationships. You got to be out of your head into your heart. So those 5 masks, when men begin to recognize them, it can really help them start creating connection. See,
real authentic connection.
Yeah, but you got to take the mask off, right? And that's what I do in my workshops. I help men take those masks off to identify. First of all, I had it on. Now let's take it off. And who would I be if I took the mask off? So that's the work. That's men's work.
That's real men's work. Whereas the I might call it the toxic mimic of men's work is what's happening on the other side of these kind of incel coaches that are really grifting to make money off of men's loneliness. Men are struggling because it's like the rug got pulled out from under men. There was this like promise. You're told if you just make lots of money and act tough, then society will reward you by giving you a woman who's going to sacrifice themselves for you. That's the deal. And now it's like, hey, that deal's off. Now what? like it's a big thing to be going through this transition. And so we can either like double down or we can roll with it and figure it out. But of course there's going to be a phase where like for example, now men are falling behind academically, boys in school. And I think a big reason for that is boys develop slower, just physiologically. So they end up being a little bit behind the girls in their class. And maybe they never catch up, or maybe they still have this patriarchal programming that says, I'm supposed to be smarter and better than the girls. And then if they're not, they give up. Like, oh, shit. Like, I don't want to compete with these girls. That's emasculating, even if they don't have that language or that consciousness around it. So they just drop out or then go down the manosphere rabbit hole of denigrating women or just trying to get the Lamborghini or the nice watch or something. So we're really seeing this kind of crisis, for men. And I think that taking off the mask is the opposite of the opposite would be armoring, where it's like, okay, I'm just going to build up this armor even more and fight.
Well, you have some men who are having these boot camps, And
Exactly.
it's like a military boot camp that they're bringing men through. And basically, they're reinforcing everything that I'm talking about in a negative
Exactly.
way.
Exactly.
So you have to get men to get comfortable with just understanding that everything is energy. I love what Einstein said about everything is energy, right? So emotions are just energy in motion. And I believe, again, this is Michael Taylor's belief that we have to be willing to do that healing work, because I believe when we experience trauma, it's like negative trapped energy in
Mhm.
us.
Mhm.
And that energy manifests in a lot of different ways, all right? But until we allow ourselves to feel it,
Mm.
we'll never let it go. We got to feel it we got to heal it. We got to feel it, then heal it to let it go. Probably the most powerful thing that I've done when I was first getting started after I went to therapy. But actually, I have to share this story about my therapy experience. So
Okay.
I gained the courage to go to therapy. And after a few sessions, my therapist says, Mike, you've done some good work. You've had a lot of breakthroughs. And she says, there's not a lot I can do for you individually anymore. So my recommendation is you join this group that I've put together for you to continue your healing.
Mm.
And when she said that, I go, you know what? And these were my exact words. I'm fixed. I
You're
don't think
fixed.
I don't think I need it.
One therapy session, I'm fixed.
And I'm just done, right? The truth was, I was just terrified of the idea of being that vulnerable in a group of people. I mean, it was hard enough with just her, but anyway, I walked away from therapy. But the truth was, I was committed to my healing. I mean, I wasn't just committed; I was obsessed. And
Mm.
so, the best thing that I've done in my life was some work with John Bradshaw. You ever hear of John Bradshaw?
Nope.
John Bradshaw was the guy. He wrote a book called Healing the Shame That Binds You.
Wow.
And it was life changing for me because in that book, I really got to the core of what was driving all of my behaviors, and it was shame.
Mm.
And that shame was the result of possibly the worst childhood you could ever imagine.
Oh.
Between the ages of 6 and 13, I was in a violent, just traumatic, I mean, just
Mm.
abandonment, sexual abuse. I mean, it was awful,
Mm.
awful. But when I did John Bradshaw's work, it allowed me to feel and heal all that suppressed and repressed pain that I had been carrying for years.
Mm.
And in allowing myself to feel it, I was able to heal it and let it go. And that's where my true emotional freedom came from. Because I had done the Anthony Robbins walking on hot coals and all the motivational stuff, but it wasn't until I went back to heal that trauma from my childhood, I could never be free.
Was that a somatic modality where you're actually using your body to feel it, or
Absolutely, absolutely. So there's
that's
there's
the key, right?
I'm sorry.
That's the key. Feel use it doing it in your body, and so talking is useful, but you can only go so far.
Right. A couple of things in that workshop that were really effective for me. So I read a book before I went to therapy. And actually, this is why I gained the courage to go to therapy, because I read in a book that John Bradshaw wrote that said, the only way to heal was
Hmm.
to create an interpersonal bridge with another human being.
Mm.
And when I read that, I knew I didn't know how to do that. I knew that there was something. I said, gosh, I got to figure out how to create that bridge because I don't know how to do that. And I figured a therapist would know. And that's why I went to therapy, because I wanted them to help me create that bridge.
Mm.
Well, in doing that and really allowing myself to just surrender to that pain,
Mm.
it just allowed me. And in the workshop, one of the things that was really powerful was we would do these exercises, with someone, maybe in a dyad or something, and then we journal about it, but we journal it with our non-dominant hand.
Ah.
And in doing it with your non-dominant hand, it's like it disconnects your head and gets you straight in your heart. And man, I mean, I was just, as I was going through this process, like I said, as painful as it was very freeing.
Mm,
But it was in releasing all of that suppressed and repressed pain, and specifically what he called that toxic shame.
yes.
So I was able to let all that toxic shame, by number one, being witnessed by another human being,
Mm,
because that takes a lot of vulnerability, obviously, just
yeah.
to let that go. But that's where my true freedom came from.
And there also is something about being witnessed in letting go of that, that we need each other. We are, each one of us alone wouldn't even be a human being. Like if we
Mhm.
were the only person on earth. So it's like there's something about that person, holding you or just seeing you that allows you to let go of it, that pain.
Absolutely. And again, and that getting to the place of surrender, where
Mm,
you allow yourself to really feel
mm,
without trying to monitor it, without trying to, rationalize it, but just allowing yourself to feel.
mm,
It's transformational.
mm.
Um, Gosh, I wish I could put it into words, but I can't. But it was just so impactful. And actually, I guess where it started for me, and I'll share this story real quickly. When I first went to therapy, the very first session, so my therapist was asking me, she says, Michael, just share some of your childhood experiences, right? So I started telling her about, some of this trauma and abuse that I had. And as I was sharing with her, I had this big smile on my face.
Oh, you were bypassing.
And she says, Michael, why are you smiling? And my response was, I made it. I'm okay. She says, Michael, you're in a therapist's office. You're not okay. And she says, it's okay to not be okay.
Ah,
And so my defense mechanism was, everything's great. I'm okay, right?
right.
And then she said this. She said, Michael, how would you feel if that happened to your son?
Mm,
And as soon as she said that, it was like I got out of my head, I got into my heart, and I could feel the pain.
mm.
And for about 10 seconds, I allowed myself for the first time to feel some of that trauma that was there. And for about
Wow.
10 seconds, I mean, tears, and I'm just like bawling. And then I rationalized, like, whoa, 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 whoa. And I asked her, I said, what did you just do? How did you do that? She said, I didn't do anything.
Mm,
She says, Michael, you've got 30 years of suppressed and repressed pain. You got to let go of.
mm,
You got to be willing to let that go.
mm.
And that's how that was the, and of course, in my little head, see, I'm trying to figure it out rationally.
Right. But
But
your
you
head
got
doesn't know much.
exactly,
Doesn't know what your heart
exactly.
does.
And so, John Bradshaw's work, what was amazing about it is it was designed to keep you out of your head.
Aha.
And it kept you in your heart. And so
Mm,
creating that interpersonal bridge that he talked about was so important. And of course, the structure of the workshop was such that you could choose to feel and express.
mm.
If you didn't choose, he had a unique way of making sure that you did.
Ah,
Because for me, I was really good at analyzing and rationalizing and trying to look good by my using big words and using psychological terms. I was
ah.
doing the whole thing, but he knew how to bypass all of that.
That fifth mask. He got your fifth mask off.
There you go. There you go.
And that was a brilliant thing because to bring up your son, because you didn't give yourself permission to grieve for yourself.
Right.
But it's a obvious thing to grieve for your child and put your child ahead of your own self.
And that was my first experience of feeling the pain that I had been carrying all my life.
Wow.
Really powerful.
Really powerful story.
Mm-hmm. So
Well, we're at an hour. Would you like to what? Sorry, were you gonna say something?
no,
Just
I'm
wanted
just I'm just smiling because I love having these conversations
Me
because
too. That's great.
especially as men, we got to have these conversations. And there's an amazing thing that happens when men allow themselves to be vulnerable with each other.
Mm.
It opens the door for other men to do the same. And
I wish I
so,
could be a fly on the wall for that. It would just because I'm a hippie. I go to a lot of hippie things. I go to a lot of ecstatic dance. Are you familiar with ecstatic dance?
mhm,
The men in those circles are really it's more culturally appropriate to dance with each other and cuddle each other and massage each other and stuff. And when I see that, I just get so happy. It just makes my heart smile because I love to see men just playing with each other and so I would love to just be a fly on the wall for a men's gathering and be able to witness that because I think that that's the key to changing the world.
yeah, absolutely. I agree 100%. I agree 100%. I believe the overwhelming majority of the world's challenges can be resolved by creating this new paradigm of masculinity I'm talking about.
Exactly. And that's what my book is about is deconstructing the old paradigm and creating new paradigms, which is really about understanding the paradigm, which is why you and I are both breaking it down, maybe from different perspectives, and then choosing what paradigm we want to have, which is cooperation and love, basically.
Yeah. So here's the formula that I give for men when we talk about relationships. I say, there's a really simple formula. If you can figure out this formula, I guarantee you can really enhance your relationship. Here's the formula: A plus A plus A equals C. And of course, they'll start scratching their heads.
What do you say?
What the hell is that? Okay, it's real simple. Appreciation plus affection, okay, plus attention equals connection. It's really that simple. Appreciation, attention, and
Mm,
appreciation
I like that
equals connection.
connection.
That's what we long for. Most of us don't know how to get it. Why? Because we taught we aren't supposed to feel.
Exactly. And that's what's like every single mass shooter is basically a lonely young man with no connection.
Absolutely. That's it. That's it in a nutshell. That's it in a nutshell. So that's my 2 cents worth, and I'm sticking to it.
Well, I appreciate your optimism. Um, yeah, I think inevitably this is all happening. We might have a couple steps back on our way forward, but clearly we're headed in that direction, and we're gonna see that maybe not in our lifetimes that will cure war and mass shooting and violence and rape, but definitely one day we're headed in the right direction.
Once again, my tagline: the irrepressible optimist with a passion for the impossible. And the primary reason for this is, number one, as a former atheist,
Wow.
there was a time when I didn't believe in anything outside of myself. I didn't believe in a higher power. I didn't believe in God, if you want to use that word. But now, oh, me and God are like this. we're really tight. And so, once again, I believe that this divine intelligence that created this amazing universe we live in, it knows exactly what it's doing. And ultimately, its intention, I believe, its intention is heaven on earth. And
I
if you
agree, and we had to go through hell in order to get to heaven.
exactly. And so there's a simple basic law. It's called the breakdown breakthrough principle. Breakdown is simply preparation for breakthrough. As you look at society as a whole right now, humanity is in complete breakdown. It's just a complete breakdown. But it's laying the foundation for an amazing breakthrough because human beings are still evolving. And I believe we're evolving to what Wayne Dyer says, which is the recognition that we're not human beings having a spiritual experience. We're spiritual beings having a human experience. And when
Absolutely.
we can grasp onto that idea that we're divine spiritual aspects of the universe, then everything changes for the better.
Exactly. That's right. And that's a great thing to end on. Well, go have a great spiritual experience tonight, human experience, dinner
Gotcha.
experience, kitty experience, whatever you get into. And it was such a great pleasure and honor to have this dialogue with you today.
And again, I want to acknowledge you for having this conversation and creating a platform that gives us an opportunity to talk about this stuff. That's how you shift the consciousness of the planet. Conversation, as simple as it may sound, opens the door to transformation.
It's true, because otherwise it's just about the algorithms pushing the stuff that's most divisive, right?
Yeah.
Like that's what gets all the likes is the most extreme misogynists and the most extreme all of this. But those of us who are just sitting here going, let's just all be nice and heal. Well, it's not exactly big news.
Yeah. But again, there's those light bearers, those people whose consciousness have awakened to a point where they say, you know what? I think I can make an impact, or as Steve Jobs said, make a dent in the universe. And
Nice.
that's what I'm trying to do. Just make my small dent in the universe for the better. So again, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Michael.
All
Have
righty,
a good
take
night.
care.
Take
Take care.
care.